Captain Hyun stared at the broken display screen on his ship's control panel and felt his heart sink into his stomach. The main engine had stopped working 3 days ago, and now the backup power was failing too. His ship, called Peaceful Dawn, was floating dead in space with nowhere to go and no way to get there. Around him, his crew of 847 beings worked quietly to fix what could be fixed, but everyone knew they were running out of time. The Villani people had always been peaceful explorers who traveled between stars to learn about new worlds and make friends with other species. They had never built weapons or fought wars because their home planet was a gentle place where nothing tried to hurt anyone. Their ships were designed for comfort and discovery, not for surviving disasters. Now that comfort was becoming their doom as the life support system slowly died around them. Hyun walked through the corridors of his ship and saw his crew members working with their usual calm dedication. The Villani looked like tall, graceful beings with soft blue skin and large, gentle eyes. They moved slowly and spoke quietly because that was their nature. Even now, when death was coming for them, they did not panic or shout. They just kept working and hoped for the best. Communications Officer Nari approached him with a worried expression on her delicate face. She held a small device in her 4-fingered hands and spoke in the musical voice of her people. "Captain, we have tried to contact every nearby ship and station, but no one is close enough to help us. The nearest Villani vessel is 2 weeks away, and we only have maybe 5 days of life support left." She paused and looked down at her feet. "There is one more option, but I do not know if we should try it." Hyun felt a chill run through his body. "What option do you mean, Nari?" She held up the communication device and explained. "We could send a distress signal on all frequencies, including the ones used by unknown species. Maybe someone out there would hear us and come to help. But Captain, we have no idea what kinds of beings might receive such a message. They could be dangerous or hostile." The captain considered this carefully. His people had always been taught that the galaxy was mostly filled with peaceful species like themselves. The Galactic Council protected everyone from the few violent races that existed, and those dangerous beings were kept far away from civilized space. Surely any species advanced enough to have space travel would be willing to help strangers in need. It was the right thing to do, and most beings in the galaxy seemed to understand what was right. "Send the signal." Nari, he decided. "Include our coordinates, our crew size, and a request for immediate assistance. Make it clear that we are peaceful explorers who need rescue. Any species capable of space travel should understand our situation and want to help." His officer nodded and began preparing the transmission. The distress signal that left Peaceful Dawn was simple and clear. It contained the ship's location in space, the number of crew members aboard, and a plea for help from anyone who might receive it. The message traveled outward at the speed of light, carrying with it the hopes of nearly 850 desperate beings who just wanted to see their families again. What Captain Hyun did not know was that his signal would travel much farther than he expected. It would pass beyond the borders of civilized galactic space and reach a small blue planet that most species had never heard of. This planet was listed in the secret files of the Galactic Council as a Class 12 death world, a place so dangerous that its inhabitants were considered too violent to be allowed contact with peaceful galactic civilization. On this planet called Earth, Admiral Park was reviewing reports at the Pacific Defense Command when an urgent message arrived. The communication officer on duty called him over with excitement in her voice. "Admiral, we are receiving a transmission from space. It appears to be a distress signal from an unknown alien species. The message is asking for immediate rescue assistance." Admiral Park was a careful man who had spent his entire career protecting Earth from potential threats. He had learned that when dealing with the unknown, it was always better to be prepared for the worst possible situation. He studied the alien message carefully and noted several important details. The signal came from very far away, which meant these aliens had advanced technology. They had a large crew, which suggested a big ship, or maybe multiple ships. Most importantly, they were specifically asking for help, which could mean they were genuinely in distress, or it could be a trap designed to lure human ships into an ambush. The Admiral called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. Around the conference table sat the most experienced military officers on Earth, including Commander Kim, who specialized in first contact protocols, and General Won, who commanded the Space Marines. Admiral Park explained the situation and asked for their opinions about how to respond. Commander Kim argued for a small diplomatic mission with just a few ships and a medical team. "These aliens are asking for help," Commander Kim said. "We should respond with a humanitarian rescue operation and use this as an opportunity to make peaceful first contact with a new species. It could be the beginning of a new era for humanity." General Wan disagreed strongly. "We know nothing about these aliens," he pointed out. "We do not know their capabilities, their intentions, or even if this distress signal is real. They could be testing our defenses or trying to determine our location. If we send a small force and walk into a trap, we could lose valuable ships and crew members. If we are going to respond at all, we need to be prepared for anything." Admiral Park listened to both arguments and made his decision based on years of military experience. The safety of Earth and humanity had to come first. "Commander Kim, I appreciate your optimism, but General Wan is right about the risks. We cannot take chances with the unknown. If we are going to answer this distress call, we will do it properly, with overwhelming force." Within hours, the largest fleet in human history began preparing for launch. 500 warships of various classes, from small fast destroyers to massive battleships loaded with enough firepower to destroy entire planets. 50,000 space marines equipped with the most advanced combat gear available. Support ships, carrying medical supplies, repair equipment, and everything needed for a major rescue operation or a prolonged military campaign. Commander Kim tried one more time to convince the Admiral to reduce the size of the response force. "Sir, this seems like massive overkill for a simple rescue mission. These aliens specifically asked for help. They are probably peaceful explorers who just need assistance." Admiral Park looked at the younger officer with understanding, but also with the wisdom that came from decades of protecting humanity. "Commander, you may be right about their intentions, but we cannot assume anything. Better to arrive with too much force and not need it than to arrive with too little and regret it. If these aliens truly need help, our fleet will be able to provide it. If this is some kind of trap, or if we encounter hostile forces, we will be prepared to defend ourselves and complete our mission." The human armada launched toward the coordinates provided in the alien distress signal. As they traveled through space toward their destination, none of them realized that their response to a simple plea for help was about to terrify an entire galaxy and nearly start the largest war in galactic history. The human fleet arrived at the coordinates like a storm of metal and fire against the darkness of space. Captain Hyan watched through the observation port of Peaceful Dawn as hundreds of alien warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel and arranged themselves in perfect military formation around his dying vessel. Each ship bristled with weapon systems that could probably destroy his entire homeworld, and they all pointed outward as if expecting an attack from somewhere in the empty void. Hyan felt his blood turn cold as he counted the vessels surrounding them. This was not a rescue fleet. This was an invasion armada larger than anything he had ever imagined. The biggest military force his own people had ever assembled during their Great War contained maybe 50 ships, and that conflict had devastated half their planet. These aliens had brought 10 times that number just to answer a distress call from a single damaged vessel. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Park studied the alien ship through his tactical display and felt satisfied with his fleet's deployment. The unknown vessel appeared to be disabled as claimed, but appearances could be deceiving. His ships maintained a protective formation that would allow them to respond to any threat, while also providing clear lanes for rescue operations if the aliens proved to be genuinely peaceful. Commander Kim prepared to make first contact according to standard military protocols that had been developed over centuries of human warfare. He activated the communication system and spoke in clear, precise language that conveyed both authority and professional competence. "This is the Terran Rescue Fleet responding to your distress signal. I am Commander Kim of the Earth Defense Force. Please identify yourself and prepare to be assisted." The words traveled across space and were translated by the universal communication systems that most galactic species used. But something was lost in that translation, something important about human intentions and human nature. What Captain Hyan heard through his ship's speakers was not an offer of help, but what sounded like a military ultimatum delivered by a species that brought hundreds of warships to rescue operations First Officer Sung moved closer to her captain and whispered in their musical language, "Sir, they are using military command protocols. They say they are here to rescue us, but they speak like conquerors preparing to take prisoners. Look at their formation, Captain. Those ships are arranged for battle, not for humanitarian assistance." Hyun studied the tactical display showing the positions of the human vessels and had to agree with his officer's assessment. Every ship was positioned to provide maximum firepower coverage while protecting their flanks from attack. This was clearly a military operation conducted by beings who thought primarily in terms of warfare and violence. The question was whether they intended to help or to capture his crew for some unknown purpose. Commander Kim received permission to board the alien vessel along with a full security escort and medical team. As the human shuttles approached peaceful dawn, the Volani crew watched in growing terror. The small craft looked like miniature warships bristling with sensors and defensive systems. Even their rescue vehicles were designed for combat, which told the aliens everything they needed to know about what kind of species they were dealing with. Dr. Lee, the fleet's chief xenobiologist, stepped aboard the alien ship with barely controlled excitement at the prospect of studying a completely new form of life. She was accompanied by 6 armed Marines, whose job was to protect her from potential threats. The Marines wore full combat armor and carried weapons capable of destroying armored vehicles. To them, this was standard security protocol for any unknown situation. To the Volani crew, it looked like an invasion force had just entered their home. The first thing Dr. Lee noticed about the aliens was how fragile and graceful they appeared. Their blue skin seemed almost translucent, and their large eyes held an expression of gentle intelligence that reminded her of Earth's dolphins. They moved, with slow, deliberate motions and spoken voices that sounded like wind chimes. Everything about them suggested a peaceful species that had evolved on a world without predators or violence. The first thing the Volani noticed about the humans was how terrifying they appeared. These beings were clearly evolved predators with forward-facing eyes designed for tracking prey and mouths filled with sharp teeth meant for tearing flesh. Their bodies were compact and muscular, built for quick, violent movement. Worst of all, they kept showing their teeth in what the Volani interpreted as aggressive threat displays, but which were actually friendly smiles. Medical Officer Jun began, examining the injured Volani crew members using standard human emergency medical procedures. He worked quickly and efficiently the way field medics were trained to work when treating wounded soldiers under combat conditions. His movements were sharp and decisive as he administered pain medication, set broken bones, and sutured wounds with mechanical precision. To Jun, this was simply good medicine performed under potentially dangerous circumstances, where speed and efficiency could mean the difference between life and death. To the Volani watching him work, he looked like some kind of warrior surgeon who treated injuries the same way his people probably treated enemies. They had never seen medical care delivered with such aggressive intensity, and it frightened them more than their original injuries had. Communications Officer Nari tried to explain to the humans that her people were peaceful explorers on a scientific mission to study distant star systems. She described their homeworld as a place of gentle weather and friendly creatures, where violence was unknown, and warfare had never been necessary. Her words were translated correctly, but the human listeners found them hard to believe. Dr. Lee asked detailed questions about Volani society and technology, with the genuine curiosity of a scientist encountering something completely new. But her enthusiasm sounded different when filtered through the universal translator. Her questions about their homeworld's location and defenses sounded like military intelligence gathering. Her interest in their population and industrial capacity sounded like preparation for conquest. Captain Hyun began to form a terrifying picture of the species that had responded to his distress call. These humans appeared to be a race of predatory warriors who approached every situation as if it were a military operation. They brought overwhelming force to simple rescue missions, and they gathered intelligence while providing medical care. Their entire culture seemed built around the assumption that violence was always just moments away. What made the situation even more disturbing was that the humans seemed to be genuinely trying to help. They provided food and medical supplies without asking for anything in return. They treated injured crew members with obvious skill and care. They spoke politely and maintained respectful behavior, even while displaying their weapons and military strength. Commander Kim noticed that the aliens seemed increasingly frightened. despite his crew's best efforts to be helpful and reassuring. Every attempt at friendly conversation seemed to make them more nervous. Every offer of assistance was met with barely concealed terror. He began to suspect that some kind of cultural misunderstanding was taking place, but he could not figure out what was going wrong. The breakthrough came when Dr. Lee was examining a young Villani female who had been injured when the ship's gravity systems failed. The alien was clearly in pain, but she flinched away every time the human doctor tried to help her. Finally, Lee sat back and asked through the translator why she was so afraid. The young Villani looked up at her with those large, gentle eyes and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "You are predators from a death world. Your eyes face forward for hunting prey. Your teeth are designed for eating flesh. Your ships carry weapons that could destroy planets. Your medicine is performed like warfare. We know you are going to hurt us even though you pretend to be helpful." Dr. Lee felt her heart break as she realized what was happening. These aliens had evolved on a world so peaceful that they could not understand why anyone would build weapons or prepare for conflict. To them, human caution looked like aggression, and human military efficiency looked like preparation for violence. The very traits that made humans good at protecting others made these gentle beings think they were about to be attacked. She tried to explain that humans build weapons to protect themselves and others from danger, not to hurt innocent people. She told them about Earth's history of predators and natural disasters that had taught humanity to always be prepared for the worst. She described how human medicine had developed from treating battlefield injuries, which was why it seemed so intense and frightening. But the Villani could not truly understand because they had no experience with violence or danger. Their world had taught them that the universe was a safe and friendly place where beings helped each other without expecting conflict. The idea that someone might build weapons for protection rather than aggression was as foreign to them as their complete pacifism was to the humans. As the rescue operations continued, both species tried their best to communicate and cooperate, despite their fundamental differences. The humans provided everything the Villani needed to survive while trying to appear less threatening. The Villani accepted the help while remaining convinced that their rescuers were actually captors who had not yet revealed their true intentions. The news traveled through galactic communication networks faster than any ship could fly. Within hours of the human fleet's arrival, every major civilization in the galaxy had received reports about the massive armada that had responded to a simple rescue request. The information came in fragments and whispers passed along by automated monitoring stations and long-range sensors that had detected the unprecedented gathering of warships in previously empty space. Chancellor Tay of the Meridian Union was reviewing trade agreements in his crystal office when the emergency alert arrived. The message was brief, but terrifying. Unknown species had deployed over 500 warships in response to a Villani distress signal. The force was larger than most galactic navies and appeared to be of completely unknown design and origin. Most disturbing of all was the fact that this massive military response had come from the direction of the galactic rim, where only dead worlds and quarantine systems were supposed to exist. The Chancellor immediately called an emergency session of the Galactic Council, which governed 47 peaceful species across thousands of star systems. Within minutes, representatives from every major civilization began arriving through quantum communication links that allowed them to meet without the delay of physical travel. The great chamber filled with beings of every imaginable form, from gas clouds that thought in electrical patterns to crystalline entities that communicated through harmonic vibrations. Councillor Bin of the Altarian Republic was the first to speak, and his words sent waves of panic through the assembled representatives. "My fellow beings, we are facing a crisis unlike any in galactic history. A species from the quarantined rim has mobilized what appears to be the largest military force ever assembled. They have responded to a routine rescue request with enough firepower to conquer entire sectors. We must assume that the age of galactic peace is ending, and prepare ourselves for war." The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Species that had not built warships in centuries began calculating how quickly they could convert civilian vessels to military use. Peaceful trading federations started forming defensive alliances. Ancient weapon designs that had been locked away in historical archives were suddenly being studied by scientists who had never imagined they would need such knowledge. On the Villani homeworld, Defense Minister 1 received the first fragmentary reports from Peaceful Dawn before all communication was lost. The transmission was broken and unclear, but the words that came through filled him with dread. The message spoke of predatory aliens with death smiles and pain givers who called themselves healers. It described beings who brought armies to rescue, missions, and who treated medical care like warfare. Minister Wan had never been a military leader because the Villani people had never needed one. His title was mostly ceremonial, left over from ancient times when their species had first reached the stars and worried about unknown dangers. Now he found himself trying to organize the defense of a world that had no weapons and a people who did not understand war. Within hours, he ordered the evacuation of all outer colonies and began the impossible task of turning farmers and artists into soldiers. The Crystalline Collective experienced the crisis in their own unique way. These silicon-based beings existed partially outside normal space and time, which allowed them to observe events across the galaxy simultaneously. They calculated probability matrices with the precision of living computers, and their analysis of the human fleet's deployment produced results that terrified even their emotionless minds. The mathematics showed a 97.3% chance that galactic civilization was about to experience its first major war in over 1,000 years. Emergency protocols that had not been activated since the Great Plague began broadcasting warnings to every known species. The message was simple and direct. The Deathworlders have awakened. All civilizations must prepare for conflict. Evacuate non-essential personnel from border systems. Convert all available resources to military production. The age of peace is ending. Captain Hyon tried desperately to contact his homeworld and explain that the situation was not what it appeared to be. The humans seemed genuinely interested in helping despite their terrifying military efficiency. They had not harmed any of his crew and were working hard to repair his ship's systems. But every attempt to send a message was blocked by the massive electromagnetic interference created by the human fleet's sensors and communication arrays. What Hyon did not realize was that his ship's emergency beacon was still broadcasting on automatic frequencies. This beacon had been designed to help rescue ships locate disabled vessels, but it was also programmed to indicate the level of danger the crew was experiencing. The beacon's signal suggested that Peaceful Dawn was under direct threat from hostile forces, which confirmed every other species' worst fears about human intentions. Intelligence networks throughout the galaxy began sharing information about the mysterious Rim species that had suddenly appeared with such overwhelming force. The fragments they gathered painted a picture of beings so violent and militaristic that they brought battle fleets to humanitarian missions. Ancient legends spoke of Deathworld species that were too dangerous for civilized contact, but most beings had assumed these were just myths created to frighten children. The Galactic Defense Coalition formed within 48 hours of the first reports. 23 species contributed ships and personnel to create the largest military force the galaxy had seen since the Unification Wars. Admiral Yoon of the Altarian Navy found himself commanding over 10,000 vessels from civilizations that had not worked together militarily in centuries. The Coalition fleet was an impressive sight with ships representing dozens of different design philosophies and technological approaches. Crystalline vessels that looked like living gemstones flew alongside organic ships grown rather than built. Energy beings piloted craft made of pure force while mechanical species contributed vessels that were essentially flying cities. Despite their differences, all these civilizations shared one common goal, which was to stop the human invasion before it could spread beyond the Villani system. Back on Earth, President Choi received increasingly disturbing reports from intelligence services that monitored galactic communications. The signals they intercepted spoke of massive military mobilizations and emergency defense preparations throughout known space. Multiple species appeared to be preparing for a large-scale conflict, and all the intelligence pointed to humanity as the perceived threat. The President called Admiral Park for an explanation. "Admiral, what exactly did you do out there? According to our monitoring stations, half the galaxy is mobilizing for war, and they all seem to think we are about to invade them. Did something go wrong with the rescue mission?" Admiral Park reviewed his mission reports with growing confusion. "Sir, we have done nothing aggressive or threatening. We arrived at the coordinates provided in the distress signal and began standard rescue operations. The alien vessel appears to contain peaceful explorers whose ship was damaged, and we are providing all necessary assistance. Our weapons remain powered down, and we have made no hostile moves toward anyone. But the President's intelligence briefings painted a very different picture. Galactic Communications spoke of the human war fleet and preparation for the Deathworld assault. Multiple species were sharing information about humanity's violent nature and discussing strategies for defending against an invasion that apparently had already begun. The galaxy was preparing to fight a war that humans did not even know they were supposed to be starting. Commander Kim aboard Peaceful Dawn began to understand the scope of the problem when Dr. Lee intercepted some of the galactic transmissions. The universal translator converted the alien languages into words that made his blood run cold. "They think we are conquering them," he told Admiral Park over secure communications. "Every species in the galaxy believes we came here to start a war." The situation became critical when long-range sensors detected the approaching Galactic Defense Coalition fleet. Thousands of alien warships were converging on the Vellani system with obvious hostile intent. The humans found themselves facing a terrible choice. They could withdraw and abandon the Vellani crew they had come to rescue, or they could stay and face a battle against overwhelming odds with an enemy that apparently wanted to destroy them. Admiral Park made the only decision his conscience would allow. "We came here to save lives, and that is what we are going to do. Prepare the fleet for defensive operations, but do not fire unless fired upon. Maybe we can still find a way to resolve this peacefully." But peaceful resolution seemed impossible when the advanced scouts of the Galactic Defense Coalition detected the human fleet and immediately began broadcasting warnings about the size and apparent hostility of the Deathworld Armada. The reports they sent back to Admiral Yoon described weapons systems beyond anything in galactic military databases and ship designs that seemed built for nothing except warfare and destruction. Both sides prepared for a battle that neither truly wanted while Captain Hyon watched helplessly from his damaged ship. The beings who had come to rescue him were about to fight a war against the entire galaxy, and it was all because of a simple misunderstanding that had grown far beyond anyone's ability to control. The first shots of what would have been the greatest war in galactic history were fired by accident. Ensign Han was piloting his destroyer through a routine patrol pattern when a navigation error brought him within weapons range of an Altarian scout cruiser. The young human officer was inexperienced and nervous about being so far from Earth in the middle of what appeared to be a growing crisis between species he had never heard of before today. The Altarian captain saw the human warship approaching at high speed and interpreted it as the beginning of the attack that everyone had been expecting. His species had evolved from prey animals on their homeworld, and their instincts told them to strike first when threatened by predators. Without waiting for authorization, he opened fire with every weapon his ship possessed, hoping to disable the human vessel before it could begin its assault on the rest of his fleet. Ensign Han barely had time to register the incoming weapons fire before his ship's automated defense systems took control. The destroyer's point defense lasers and missile interceptors had been designed to protect human vessels from enemy attacks during the brutal wars of Earth's past. They responded to the alien weapons with mechanical efficiency that left no room for hesitation or mercy. The Altarian scout cruiser was destroyed in less than 3 seconds. Its shields collapsed under the focused fire of weapon systems that had been created specifically to kill other warships as quickly as possible. The alien crew had no time to send distress signals or escape pods before their vessel was reduced to an expanding cloud of glowing debris that drifted slowly through space, like a monument to the failure of peaceful intentions. Admiral Yoon watched the destruction of his scout ship through the tactical displays on his flagship, and felt his worst fears confirmed. The humans had opened hostilities by destroying an unarmed reconnaissance vessel without warning or provocation. The Deathworld species was apparently even more violent and aggressive than the intelligence reports had suggested. He immediately ordered his fleet to assume battle formation and prepare for full-scale warfare. The news of the first combat engagement spread through both fleets like wildfire. On the human side, officers who had been hoping for peaceful resolution began checking their weapons systems and reviewing combat protocols. These beings had apparently come to fight after all, and now it was too late for diplomacy or compromise. The only question was whether humanity would survive the coming battle against overwhelming numerical odds. On the alien side, the destruction of the Altarian vessel was seen as proof that every dire prediction about human nature had been correct. Species that had contributed ships to the defensive coalition began demanding immediate retaliation for what they saw as an unprovoked act of murder committed by savage Deathworld predators who brought death wherever they went. Commander Kim aboard Peaceful Dawn realized that the galaxy was about to tear itself apart over a misunderstanding that had grown far beyond anyone's ability to control. He studied the intercepted alien communications and began to see patterns that had not been obvious before. These species were not naturally warlike or aggressive. They were terrified, peaceful beings who had been forced into a conflict they did not understand by circumstances they could not control. Dr. Lee made a crucial discovery while analyzing the data she had collected about Villani physiology and culture. She compared their physical characteristics with information from the galactic databases that had been captured when the human fleet intercepted alien communications. What she found changed everything she thought she knew about the crisis. The aliens were not just different from humans in terms of culture and technology. They were fundamentally different in terms of evolution and biology. Most galactic species had evolved on worlds with low gravity, minimal weather patterns, and no large predators. They had never experienced natural selection pressures that required them to fight for survival or compete for resources. Violence was not just foreign to their cultures, it was completely outside their biological and psychological makeup. Earth, on the other hand, was what galactic scientists classified as a Class 12 death world, where everything from the weather to the smallest microorganisms was constantly trying to kill anything that lived there. Humans had evolved under conditions that required them to be aggressive, cooperative, and paranoid all at the same time. Their entire civilization was built around the assumption that danger could come from anywhere at any time, and the only way to survive was to be prepared for the worst possible scenario. This explained why human rescue operations looked like military invasions to alien observers. It explained why human medical procedures appeared violent and aggressive to beings whose evolution had never required them to treat traumatic injuries under combat conditions. It explained why humans brought weapons to peaceful missions and why they arranged their ships in defensive formations even when helping strangers. The revelation struck Dr. Lee like a physical blow as she realized the scope of the tragedy that was unfolding around them. The galaxy was preparing to destroy humanity, not because humans were evil or aggressive, but because two completely different types of evolution had produced species that could not understand each other's basic motivations and behaviors. What humans saw as reasonable caution, aliens saw as preparation for conquest. She immediately shared her findings with Commander Kim, who began to see the conflict in an entirely new light. The aliens were not plotting against humanity or trying to conquer human space. They were genuinely terrified prey species who believed they were about to be eaten by predators from a death world. Their military preparations were not aggressive but defensive, driven by the same survival instincts that had caused small animals on Earth to flee from approaching humans. Captain Hyon watched the human doctor work with his injured crew members and began to notice details that had escaped his attention before. The humans moved with the quick efficiency of predators, but they used that efficiency to heal rather than harm. They carried weapons that could destroy planets, but they kept those weapons pointed away from the beings they were trying to protect. They spoke in military command language, but they used it to coordinate rescue operations rather than attacks. The captain began to understand that these beings were not the monsters his species had imagined them to be. They were protectors who had learned to fight because their world had taught them that the universe was dangerous. They brought overwhelming force to rescue missions because they wanted to be absolutely certain they could defend anyone who needed their help. Their aggressive medicine and military efficiency were not signs of evil intent, but evidence that they took the responsibility of helping others very seriously. But understanding was not enough to prevent the war that was rapidly approaching. Both fleets were now in weapons range and tensions were rising with each passing minute. The Galactic Defense Coalition had superior numbers while the human fleet had superior individual ship capabilities. The battle would be devastating for both sides and would probably result in the complete destruction of two very different approaches to civilization. Admiral Park made one final attempt to prevent the catastrophe by broadcasting a message to the alien fleet. "This is Admiral Park of the Earth Defense Force. We did not come here to fight. We came to rescue the crew of a damaged vessel that requested our assistance. We have no hostile intentions toward any galactic civilization, and we wish to resolve this crisis through peaceful negotiation." But his words were filtered through the same cultural and biological differences that had created the misunderstanding in the first place. To the aliens, his offer of negotiation sounded like a demand for surrender, delivered by a predator species that had already demonstrated its willingness to kill. Admiral Yoon responded by ordering his fleet to begin their attack pattern, while still hoping that somehow the humans could be convinced to withdraw before more blood was shed. The stage was set for a battle that would devastate both sides and poison relations between humanity and the galaxy for generations to come. Two species that should have been natural allies were about to destroy each other, because evolution had taught them different lessons about how to survive in a dangerous universe. The only hope for preventing total catastrophe lay in the possibility that someone on one side or the other would find a way to bridge the gap between predator and prey before it was too late to stop the killing. Commander Kim made a decision that would either save two civilizations or end his military career in disgrace. He stood up from his station aboard Peaceful Dawn and activated the broadband communication array without authorization from Admiral Park or anyone else in the chain of command. His voice carried across space to reach both the human fleet and the massive alien armada that was preparing to destroy it. "Stop," he said simply. "Just stop and listen to me. We are not your enemies. You are not our enemies. We are all here because we want to help each other, and we are about to destroy each other because we do not understand how different we are. Give me 5 minutes to explain what is happening, and maybe we can prevent the greatest tragedy in galactic history." The transmission reached Admiral Park first, and the Admiral's immediate reaction was to court-martial his subordinate for violating orders and potentially compromising the entire fleet's safety. But something in Kim's voice made him hesitate, and instead of cutting the communication, he decided to listen to what his officer had to say. Admiral Yoon received the same transmission on his flagship, and his first instinct was to dismiss it as another Deathworld trick designed to confuse the coalition forces before the attack began. But his species had evolved from prey animals, and prey animals lived longer when they listened to potential threats rather than ignoring them. He ordered his fleet to hold their attack pattern while the humans spoke. Kim took a deep breath and began to explain what Dr. Lee had discovered about the fundamental differences between Deathworld and Garden World evolution. He described how humans had learned to be protective by being aggressive, and how their entire civilization was built around the assumption that kindness required strength. He explained that Earth's harsh environment had taught humanity that the only way to help others was to be prepared to fight anyone who might try to hurt them. His words were translated by universal communication systems and broadcast to thousands of ships containing millions of beings who had never imagined that predators could be protectors. The concept was so foreign to their experience that many of them initially rejected it as impossible. How could a species that brought weapons to rescue missions claim to be peaceful? How could beings that looked like hunters say they only wanted to help? But Dr. Lee supported Kim's explanation with detailed biological and psychological data that painted a clear picture of human evolution and motivation. She described how Deathworld species developed strong cooperative instincts because survival required them to work together against common threats. She explained how human medicine appeared violent because it had been developed to treat injuries caused by predators, natural disasters, and warfare. Captain Hyon added his own observations about how the humans had behaved during the rescue operation. Despite their terrifying appearance and military efficiency, they had never harmed any of his crew. They had provided food, medical care, and technical assistance without asking for anything in return. They had treated his people with courtesy and respect, even while displaying the weapons that could have destroyed his ship in seconds. The breakthrough came when Medical Officer Jun grew frustrated with the continued fear and suspicion of the Villani crew members he was trying to help. One of the aliens was dying from internal injuries that required immediate surgery, but she kept refusing treatment because she was terrified of his aggressive medical techniques. In desperation, Jun decided to try a completely different approach. He set aside all his surgical instruments and medical devices. He dimmed the lights in the medical bay and began working with just his hands moving slowly and gently like the Villani themselves did. He spoke in quiet, soothing tones as he carefully examined the injured alien and explained every procedure before he performed it. The surgery took 3 times longer than normal, but it was successful, and more importantly, it was broadcast to the entire assembled fleet. Thousands of beings watched a human predator save the life of an alien prey species, using techniques that prioritized the patient's emotional comfort over medical efficiency. They saw how carefully he handled the delicate Villani physiology, and how genuinely concerned he appeared to be about causing unnecessary distress. Most importantly, they saw that when the situation required it, humans could set aside their aggressive instincts and work within the cultural framework of other species. Admiral Yoon was the first alien commander to respond to Kim's explanation. The Altarian officer had lost friends and colleagues in previous wars, and he understood better than most how violence could spiral out of control when different species misunderstood each other's intentions. He ordered his ships to power down their weapons and assume a neutral formation while he considered what he had learned. Other coalition commanders followed his example as they began to understand that the human fleet was not positioned for attack, but for defense. The formation that had appeared aggressive to alien observers was actually designed to protect the damaged Villani vessel from any potential threats. The humans had arranged their ships to create a defensive perimeter around the beings they were trying to rescue. Admiral Park made the most difficult decision of his military career when he ordered the entire human fleet to power down their weapon systems and assume rescue formation. This left his ships vulnerable to attack from the superior numbers of the alien coalition. But it also demonstrated beyond any doubt that humanity's intentions were peaceful. The gesture was broadcast throughout the galaxy and marked the beginning of a new era in interspecies relations. President Choi received reports of the successful first contact operation with a mixture of relief and amazement. The crisis that could have destroyed both human and galactic civilization had been resolved through understanding rather than warfare. He immediately authorized Ambassador Park to begin formal diplomatic relations with the Galactic Council and to establish protocols for future cooperation between humanity and other species. The rescue of Peaceful Dawn became the foundation for the first human galactic exchange program. Captain Hyun volunteered to serve as a liaison officer to help other species understand human culture and motivations. He worked closely with Dr. Lee to develop educational programs that explained how Deathworld evolution created species that appeared aggressive but were actually highly protective of others. The program was so successful that within months human rescue fleets were responding to distress calls throughout the galaxy. Species that had initially been terrified of humanity began to request human assistance when they faced natural disasters, military threats, or other emergencies that required the kind of overwhelming response that only Deathworld species could provide. Admiral Park became the first human ambassador to the Galactic Council, where he worked to establish new protocols for interspecies cooperation that took into account the vast differences between Deathworld and Garden World civilizations. His military background proved invaluable in helping peaceful species understand concepts like strategic planning, risk assessment, and defensive preparation. Dr. Lee's research into Deathworld evolution became the basis for a new field of xenobiology that studied how different planetary environments produced different approaches to civilization and cooperation. Her work helped explain why some species were naturally peaceful while others were naturally protective, and how these differences could be strengths rather than sources of conflict. The galaxy learned that the most dangerous species could also be the most trustworthy when it came to protecting others. Human fleets became a common sight in systems facing emergencies, and their presence was no longer a source of fear but of hope. The beings who had once been seen as savage Deathworld predators became known as the protectors who would fight anyone or anything that threatened the innocent. Commander Kim's final report on the first contact incident captured the essence of what humanity had learned about itself and its place in the galaxy. "We brought an armada to answer a cry for help because that is what our world taught us," he wrote. When someone needs protection, you bring everything you have and you prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. The galaxy is learning what humans have always known, which is that sometimes the fiercest protection comes from the gentlest hearts. The Villani crew returned home as heroes, carrying with them a message of hope that spread throughout their civilization and beyond. They had learned that strength and compassion were not opposites but partners, and that the universe contained both predators and protectors. Most importantly, they had learned that sometimes when you send out a call for help, the response comes not as a single rescue ship, but as an entire armada of beings who care enough to bring overwhelming force to ensure that no harm comes to those who need their protection. The story of the Great Misunderstanding became a legend that was told throughout the galaxy for generations. It reminded all species that differences in evolution and culture could be sources of strength rather than conflict when approached with understanding and respect. And in the depths of space, human rescue fleets continued to respond to distress calls, carrying with them the promise that no one who asked for help would ever be abandoned as long as Earth's children had the power to reach them.